Okay, so yesterday we learned Sif Yud Aleph, which is good morning, which is the halacha of making sure that you pay for employment on time. And payment of employment is due if the person is a schir yom. Payment is due at the end of that day because he's a day laborer. Good morning. And if the person is a kablan, payment is due upon delivery of goods. That's the standard halacha. Now, of course, and we said that it's also true about rentals as well. Once the rental period is over, payment is due. Now we need to be very clear, and we'll see this in the halacha, that everything is according to the stipulation between the two parties. So you can have a 30-day, 60-day, 90-day schedule that you can set up. You can extend credit and so forth. These are all optional, but the standard halacha, when there has been no contract and no kind of standard established, let's say you hire a kid to mow your lawn, lawn your mow, right? So then payment is due immediately. Okay, so let's take a look. Kishem shemitzvah lasei schar pu'ulas adam bismano, just like we said, just like there's a mitzvah to pay the wages of a person's work on time, and if you delay, you are over a mitzvah lo saseh. So let's take a look at what the Imrei Yaakov says. Vein ani uvein asher. It makes no difference whether the person in question is poor and needs the money for his sustenance, or whether he's a person of means and he's got a very nice padding of savings. It doesn't matter. You can't say, well, you don't need the money. You're a big corporation and you got plenty of customers. That's not an excuse. So why does the Torah, in talking about the mitzvah of paying a schir yom at the end of his day, the Torah says, "Biyomo titein sicharo below savo olav hashemesh ki anihu ve'elav hu noseis nafsho," because he's poor and he's got his life dependent upon you and upon his wages. He says that doesn't mean it's only when the person is poor you have this obligation, but rather it's to tell you that if you have several employment creditors and you've got a long line of people that you have to pay, and you don't know which one takes precedence, the ani takes precedence over the asher. In a situation where, let's say, you may have even limited funds and you have to choose, which laborer do I pay for? Which service do I have to pay for first? The answer is you have to pay the ani first. The imhu mechalal Shabbos befarhesia omumur lahachis tzarich iyon iyeshbo lo salim. If the person is a mechalal Shabbos publicly, or if he's a mumur lahachis, we've learned all these halachas before. It's not clear, he says, whether you would still be in violation of bal talim. You may not withhold or delay paying a person. If you remember what we've learned before, the Chazon Ish made no distinction in halacha between these two. So he's quoting those poskim who hold that there still is a distinction today. But in the Shar Hatzion, in pointing out the sources, he says it could even be that he's even worse than a non-Jew, because by a non-Jew you also have this obligation to pay him in a timely manner. Okay, so this
week's parsha.
Yeah, that's right. It's this week's parsha, Parshas Kedoshim. Over below sase, you violate a negative commandment. Withholding payment when it's due is like taking the person's soul. In other words, it's tantamount to murder. And it's derived from the words in the pasuk that he is placing his soul upon that money. In other words, his soul is dependent upon that money. Va'over b'chamish lavin va'aseh. And you violate, listen to this. This is powerful stuff. This is not like a light avera. You violate 5 negative commandments and 1 positive commandment anytime you fail to pay a person's wages when due. Okay? And unfortunately, this is not a highly regarded halacha. This is not a halacha that people take seriously. And that's why there's so much emphasis placed on it. Well, so what are you violating? Lo tigzol, you may not steal, because he provides a service. By withholding it, you're stealing from him. Number 2, lo ta'ashok schar sachir, do not oppress the laborer. Next, number 3, lo ta'ashok et re'acha, do not oppress your fellow. Number 4, lo talim, do not delay payment. And number 5, lo tavo alav hashemesh, do not allow the sun to go down before you pay him. The aseh de biyomo titein scharo, and you violate the positive commandment of pay him on the day wages are due. The afal gav de miksasam ksivi b'schir yom uksasam b'schir laila. He says, even though some of these the mitzvos that we've bundled all together, some are written in the context of a day laborer, some are written in the context of a night laborer. B'kol makom svirle laharambam v'hashulchan aruch dekeven deshem schirus chadhu b'schayiv gam b'schirus yom al mashenemer b'schirus laila b'chein epcha. The Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch are of the opinion that there really is no difference between a day laborer and a night laborer. The Torah talks about different examples. Sometimes a person may work by day, sometimes he may work by night, but the law is the same. And if the Torah includes one losase in one context and another losase in the other context, it's coming to teach you that you bundle them all together. He says, when we say that you violate 5 negative commandments, that's provided that you have no intention of paying him. Aval imdaito l'shalim lo, as eno over ela alav de lo savo alav hashemesh. De bazeh over miyad she'over zmano afshadaito l'shalim. He says, but if you do have intention of paying him, but you just feel that you don't need to pay him when it's due, so then you're only over on one mitzvah slow saseh, which is do not allow the sun to go down before you pay him. Okay. Now, before we go any further, I don't know why that is. You would think that even if a guy's just playing games and delaying, he gets it from the Sema. All right, but in any event, look, we don't give lashes today anyway. And biyomoti tein scharo, you must pay him on time because of a Rambam. Shezem mechuyav b'chol schir yom, bein nochri bein b'Yisrael, mitzvahs aseh lifroa bismano. Jew or non-Jew, the halacha is the same. And obviously the violation of lo sigzol is also the same. You know that you're not allowed to steal from a Gentile. I don't know why he says that it's tzarich iyun, because it should seem to be quite obvious. He says, I refer you to the Minchas Chinuch, Sifkat and Zayin. Maybe I'll copy the Minchas Chinuch for tomorrow and we'll take a look at it. But before we get to the rest of this halacha, let's take a look at first the Likutim. Shemitzvah lo se schar, amakaya mitzvah schar schachir bismano, zoche az l'neshama yisera shekana ha'adam b'Shabbos. That whoever fulfills the mitzvah, in other words, this is now the positive incentive, whoever fulfills this mitzvah, he's quoting from the Stei Chemed, by paying his workers on time, will get the merit of having a neshama yisera, of having an added soul even during the week, just like you have on Shabbos. V'isa b'shem ha'ari hakadosh she arashe tevos b'yamot titein scharo hu Shabbos. That the letters b'yamot titein scharo, Beis, Taf, Sin. If you put those letters together, you get the word Shabbos if you jumble them. And that's beremez lahanal. That's an allusion to what we're saying. Okay. Schar pu'ulas adam. If you have to pay a person's wages, balabayis shesochar poel, va'amar lo sheiten lo chayfetz bischara. That if a balabas hires a worker and he tells him that he will give him an object, some object of value as his wages, yachol litein lo achar kach damav, he's allowed to pay him cash in lieu of the object. Why? Dehol v'lo mashach hapol chachefetz lo kinao. Because since the worker did not make a physical acquisition on the object, he hasn't legally acquired the object. So let's say a guy says, I'll paint your house. And this says, okay, tell me how much do you charge for painting the house? He says, you know what? I noticed you got a Mickey Mantle baseball card that in your collection. I'll do it for your Mickey Mantle baseball card. That's one of the most valuable baseball cards. Okay. So the guy says, no, okay. And there's no kinyan made on the baseball card. So if you get the baseball card valuated by you get it appraised, so then you can pay him the appraisal value instead of you giving him the Mickey Mantle baseball card. He may be disappointed, but it probably it's not the same thing, because usually people are used to getting cash, right? So it doesn't seem like you can pay someone with shava kesef when the standard is to pay them kesef. Now, v'ima balabais rotza litein lapol esachefetz ein hapol yocher lomar tein li damav. If the balabais wishes to give him the object that they had originally agreed upon, the worker cannot now turn around and change his mind if there was a stipulation. So again, you see that there is more favor to the employer and the landlord in halacha than you would think in secular law. Today, everything's been pushed to the side of the tenant, to the side of the employee. Whereas in halacha, the employee has rights, but there's definitely some rights that are granted to an employer as well. Now, pu'ulas adam, you have to pay for human labor. Kasav hachafetz chaim b'zelashana. Devar eitza echas hanogei le'inyan iser gezel v'oshek schar sachir v'hi. I have a matter of advice regarding the law that you cannot withhold wages in a timely manner. Okay, and stealing. Shekol adam shemevakesh la'adam acher sheya'aseh lo eza pu'ula bischar yiksav imo hamekach bitchila. Whenever you hire a person to come work for you, you should always establish the price first. And unfortunately, I just did not follow the Chafetz Chaim's advice. I hired someone because my wife and I heard some scratching in our roof. So we figured there must be maybe some critters up there. So we hired someone. And the truth is, I've used this guy before. I trust him, and I know that he charges a fair wage. So he gave us the bill. I told my wife to pay it. It didn't make a difference to me how much it was, because I know this guy is fair. But the Chafetz Chaim says it's a proper eitzah, proper good advice, is that whenever you hire someone to work for you, establish the price first. The ilav hachi alul miod lihios gazlan ba'oshek schar sachir imlo yirtze liyot vatran gadol b'mamono kidei latseis min hasafi, because it will happen quite often that the guy will present you with a bill at the end of services, and you're going to have a big yetzer hara to contest the bill and to not pay him in a timely fashion, because unless you can bring yourself to the point where you say, money doesn't matter, just give him whatever he asks. The halo al pirov yitztarecha adam lemeot pu'ulot b'chol shana. He says the average person, he says, needs hundreds of different jobs done for him over the course of the year. I don't know where he gets hundreds. I'm not sure where that comes from. Umatsui ma'od sha'achar ha'pu'ula yesh vikuach bein ha'uman ve'al balabayas be'inyan shilom haschar. And many times it's not uncommon for there to be some kind of conflict or disagreement about what is owed for the services rendered. And when the two parties separate because there's a disagreement, each party thinks that the other guy is stealing. He's not paying me what I deserve, and the other guy says he's ripping me off. Yeah. And even though the guy pays what the guy agreed, there's resentment, and there is they don't want to fight. Even if they want to be gentlemen about it, they're not going to fight. There are still bad feelings between the two of them. And and sometimes they even get into an argument. And the Chafetz Chaim continues that really the halacha says that you go according to the minhag HaMedina, whatever the standard of the place where you live is as far as payment is concerned. That's what has to be followed. And if you deduct even 1 penny from what the standard of payment for that person's labor is, you are considered to be a gazlan and an oshek schar sachir, one who withholds payment. You don't want that. How can you possibly know the standard of so many different acts of labor that are performed for you? One guy's your gardener, one guy is your plumber, one guy is this, one guy is that. A lot of times people think, hey, he's ripping me off. When in reality, maybe you don't know that market prices have gone up significantly and you're going to have resentment. So make sure you educate yourself first and find out from the person who's proposing to do the work for you what he charges, and then decide with a leiv shalom and with a full heart whether you're prepared to pay it or not. Ubal karcho im yirtze latzeis yidei chova below pikbo ki yamuchrach tamid litein la'abal malacha kefi mashu hurotza v'zami gam ken kasha ma'od. He says a person who's an erlich hayid wants to fulfill his obligation will feel obligated to always pay a person the full price for what the guy is asking. And sometimes people people who are laborers do exploit and jack up their prices unfairly, and that's also difficult. Al kain harotza latzes yedei shamayim yitzov imo b'tchila v'yetze midei kol safek. And therefore, the best thing to do is to establish a price at the very outset. It's even better if you establish a price for the whole job at the very outset. You tell me what you think this is going to cost you. Give me your best estimate. And a lot of times, people like plumbers and stuff like that will give you an estimate, and they'll tell you, this is what I believe the job will cost. I think it's going to take me 2.5 hours to fix this problem. It'll be 2.5 hours of labor. I charge such and such per hour for labor. I think it's going to cost such and such for parts, and Shalom Al Yisrael. Now, that doesn't mean that it's always going to work out that way, because the guy will open up the sink or will open up the wall and he'll discover something else, which many times does happen. But at least you know that you've tried your best to remove any ambiguity from a labor deal. And when the laborer realizes that that person who's hiring him wants to establish the price at the outset, he will be incentivized to give him the best price he can without trying to rip him off at the end once he's got him, at his mercy. Okay? And certainly a Talmud Chacham should comport himself this way. The ilav hachi milvad shash gezel va'oshek schar sachir matzui ma'od chilal Hashem. He says, because not only could you potentially get yourself in the problem of stealing from the laborer by refusing to pay him because you feel he's ripped you off, and also and other issues, you're also avoid the chilul Hashem, because you're a Talmud Chacham. He sees you're a rabbi. He sees you're an Orthodox Jew, and you may potentially create a chilul Hashem if the laborer, whether he's Jew or non-Jew, sees you trying to squeeze him for what you feel is an unfair amount. When you don't pay a worker what he feels he's entitled to. Because the worker will feel, I got ripped off by this very religious Jew. So again, we have to be concerned about those issues. Does that mean that every Orthodox Jew abides by this? No, it doesn't mean that. But that just means that those of us who know this halacha and have read the Chafetz Chaim have to work even harder on trying to make sure that we avoid any kind of dispute that may ensue with the laborer. Now, even despite our best efforts, there are going to be situations where disputes will arise. And I know, like, there are certain people that I've hired that I won't hire again because I know that they charge rates that are unreasonable, and they provide products that are inferior. And there are other people who I see have integrity when they work. They charge, it's very clear in their bill what they're charging for. The thing that I love is when a laborer will tell you, you know what, you can either get the part through me, or you can go down the street and or Home Depot and buy the part yourself, and I'll only charge you for the labor, but I'll save you an extra $100. It'll save you an extra $100. When you speak to a laborer and a laborer responds to you in that way, then you know he's an Erlicha guy, and you know that that's the person that you want to work for you. So anyway, there's so much we could talk about. Okay, so anyway,
Rabbi,
yeah.
Can I just run by a scenario with a contemporary scenario that may some companies may find themselves in, or about in dealing with their employees. I've seen this scenario happen a number of times where people own businesses and they have very long time employees. Now, if something happens to the business or they want to close down, sometimes, unfortunately, they have to bankrupt the business. Otherwise, they're on the hook if they have long-time employees. For serious money, like somebody's working for you 25 years. You could be on the hook for paying them wages for, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years possibly.
You're talking about severance, right?
Yeah, severance.
Yeah, right. Well, I don't know. Do you remember that case of the guy, and where was it, in New England somewhere many years back? He kept his factory open even though it wasn't making money for him anymore, because he knew his employees were relying on that for their parnasa. What was he? It was an Orthodox Jew who was doing that. Yeah, I mean, right. So Moish points out there is no bankruptcy in halacha. But there's also you can argue there's no severance in halacha. So it's not clear, but to go ahead and deliberately bankrupt the business when the business is still lucrative and making money, but to do it to avoid paying severance to someone who's been a loyal employee for 25 years, certainly objectively doesn't sound like the honest and straightforward thing to do. Well, Dina de Malchusa, I'm not sure, is necessarily an argument, because the same Dina de Malchusa that says that you have to pay severance also says you don't have to pay if you go bankrupt, right? So I'm not sure. Every situation is going to be unique, of course, right? But a person who's been working at the company for 25 years probably deserves his severance if they've been a loyal employee. So to stiff them by putting the company into bankruptcy doesn't sound like it's the right thing. Now, of course, you could create any scenario you like, right? Ron. So you'd have to make an argument to defend that kind of behavior, I think.
Well, that could bankrupt you, because if you have a number of employees and you're paying them, and you have them for many years, you could be on the hook for hundreds and hundreds of thousands, depending on how many employees you have.
I understand that, but that's the cost of doing business, right? If I've been running a successful business for 30 years and I've had employees that have been loyal to support my success, and then I come to the realization at the end of 30 years, hey, I'm going to owe these people a lot of money if I decide to retire. But that's the cost of doing business. Look at all the prosperity these people contributed to you over the course of that time. So maybe more money should have been put aside for them in an account for that eventuality that you'd have to pay them severance at the end of the business's tenure. I don't know what to tell you, but every situation is going to be different, is going to be unique. I guess in a situation where a person has to close the business because the business is losing money and the industry no longer allows for that company to be lucrative, maybe there would be circumstances where you could justify it, where the company does legitimately have to go bankrupt, right? But I guess I would tell you it depends on the circumstance. We'd have to go through each situation individually.
And from what I understand, and this is hindsight, but I think the employee contract can specify what the severance is going to be or something like that. And so if the employee signs onto that at the outset, then I think that can limit, from what I've heard. But I'm not sure.
Yeah, I guess one of the things to do is to try to negotiate with the employee and say, listen, I need to close down the business. We're bleeding money. The company is no longer lucrative. I don't want to leave you high and dry. I can either declare bankruptcy or I can pay you X. Is this an acceptable amount for you? Because otherwise I'm going to have to go bankrupt, right? The thing is, be fair with the employee and explain the situation to them so that they don't feel like the Chafetz Chaim said, you don't want a situation where a person's going to walk away from having worked for you for 20 years and he feels my boss stiffed me after my having spent the last 20 years of my life working faithfully for them and really making money for the company. And especially because you're an Orthodox Jew, you don't want that over your head, right? So the best thing is to be honest with the employee and say, this is my predicament. I don't know what to do, but I certainly don't want to leave you with nothing after having worked for me for all this time, but I can't afford to pay you a full severance. Can we work something out? They might. They will. Yeah. 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 Right. Yeah. Or maybe work out a payment schedule with them. Who knows? I don't know. It's a difficult situation to be in. There's the cost of, there's so many hidden costs of doing business, right? And that many times a business owner, a small business owner, doesn't take into account the costs of doing business. And I suppose that perhaps these have to be factored in with maybe a small business advisor that you hire to give you advice as far as how to structure the payroll and how to structure the savings plan or whatever it is. These are things that are well beyond my pay, right?
And probably at the outset, Rabbi, I would think is the easiest, because I think we said before when we talked about when you have to pay for services rendered, it's better to set it up.
Set it up at the very beginning. That's right. Set it up at the beginning. That may not help Ron in his real life situation question, but these things but you're right. Okay, we'll hold it here for today.